Thank you, Chair. I don't actually disagree with the idea of bringing this before the people. I'm kind of interested what the people think about this, but I do think I have an obligation to say something about this. I disagreed basically with everything that was just said, every single thing. And there's some reasons for that. And I don't have a problem with people believing that. Everybody gets to believe what they want to believe. But here's an interesting thing about marriage that I seem to be a little different than I would say the average pastor is. In fact, I've been ostracized by ministry contexts because of this. I think the idea of what we call this state-sponsored marriage mentality is not actually a biblical thing, and the Bible is my foundational book. It's my worldview. But here's where marriage went off the rails, in my opinion, is literally in the 1600s, we had some things going on here in what we now call the United States, but it wasn't the United States at the time. And there was some local groups, some local townships and things like that were popping up, and people were developing what we now call the United States of America. And then there began to be an understanding of what a government might look like on this continent. And so people began to do the same things they had been doing in Europe, and they started actually taxing people. And this developed over quite a long time frame. And then all of a sudden they realized if we give the people an incentive to be taxed, they'll do it. And so for the first time, we see what evolved later into the equivalent of a marriage license. This had never been done before. And now we see this marriage license mentality. And this marriage license basically was developed that if the state would now sign a contract with these people so that they could get a tax break. That's literally the origination of marriage license. Most people don't know that. The church was not in favor of it at the time, any more than I'm in favor of it today. I think it's a humanistic approach to something that is not a human thing. Okay, so then what happens is now you have something called a marriage license. For the first time ever, the state is the one that is qualifying people to be married. And I don't think that's okay. Marriage was never between people and a state or a governmental thought process or anything like that. Marriage was always between people and God. God established marriage in the first chapter of Genesis. This is a God-ordained, God-created thing. Humankind didn't create marriage. This was never a human-created thing. In fact, marriage predates any institution that's ever existed, including religion. And so now we have this idea that the state is the one who decides this. This is why when the church, I've had this discussion at very high level denominational groups and things like that, and I tell them, we sold out a long time ago. I'm saying the church, the people of God sold out a long time ago because we wanted a tax break. This had nothing to do with the state. People are not supposed to be making decisions about who can get married and who can't get married. There's only one person that makes that decision, that's God. And He decides, and He's already told us in the Bible. And I know this is countercultural, and it's the exact opposite of what the sponsors are saying. I get all that. That doesn't bother me a bit. I know at the end of the day that God created marriage. People didn't. You can marry whatever you want. You can marry a tree. You can marry a goat. Because that's man-created concepts. Those are man-created unions. But if you want what God says is marriage, because he's the one who made it, then you have to go by his rules. And God said between a man and a woman. That doesn't change just because we decide to change it. That doesn't change the higher spiritual law that God established there because we tiny little bitty human beings think we're bigger than God. That doesn't change that. You can do whatever you want. The Bible even says this. Paul said everything is permissible, but not all things are advantageous. You can do anything you want. You can say, no, there's no God. There's no such thing as marriage, or we're going to create marriage how we want. You can do whatever you want to do. But the only reason I'm standing up here right now is because I feel I have an obligation to also say, but at the end of everything, you're going to stand before this God. And change the rules however you want. This is not the only rule we're changing. We change rules all the time. We change rules about life, who gets to live, who doesn't, inside the womb, outside the womb. We change all kinds of laws. These are God laws. So you can do whatever you want, and however the people vote here. I would be interested to know if the people say this is between man and a woman. Next session, do we bring another law back that says, no, we don't agree with that, and we'll change it anyway? Because this is a rail against God's authority and God's sovereignty. And at the end of time, we all stand before God. And you have to stand before God about changing God's laws and living how you want. And by the way, it's not just about this. We're going to stand before God for everything. This is just one of them. God created this, and he created it actually for our benefit. He didn't create this to hurt us. He didn't create this to limit us. He created this because he knows that as human beings, we do a lot of things to hurt ourselves. And this is one of the many of the list that we're doing to hurt ourselves. We hurt ourselves internally, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, when we do these kind of things. So I don't think that I'm saying this because I'm convincing anybody. I'm doing this kind of like, the prophet Isaiah, Jeremiah, some of those guys. I'm saying this because I think I have a responsibility to say this. Guys, every single one of us, not just the sponsors, every single one of us are going to be held accountable for how we look at God and how we look at God's laws. And this goes directly against God's laws. So I guess you got to do what you got to do.